Jordan Peterson is a font of basically continuous, unscientific, religious, mystical mumbo jumbo. Even his fans sort of understand this, and even people who listen to him regularly and take him seriously notice this on some level. You'll see people making fun of just sort of the way he talks about how every subject sort of leads into every other subject for him. It's always, and that's when a vision of the Virgin Mary came to him, see, this refers us to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn saw the Virgin Mary and lobsters, and it's just always just this continuous loop. So there's a certain level of absurdity to his position, yet he's taken so seriously. So our question we're going to answer today is, why is Jordan Peterson so influential despite his mysticism? The answer to this question is going to teach us something about the causal hierarchy of philosophy, which I think hasn't been understood before. So let me reintroduce you to the causal hierarchy, specifically of philosophy. Here it is in the lower right-hand corner of our screen. Now, what I said in my video on causal hierarchy is that, the link will be in the description. What I said on my video is that this hierarchy, which you may recognize from certain courses in philosophy, especially the objectivist philosophy, this hierarchy is not a hierarchy of proof. It's not that you need to know metaphysics in order to know epistemology, in order to know ethics. That's not how it works. Rather, what's going on is that the facts of metaphysics causally condition the facts of epistemology and therefore change them. So on some level, in order to really understand the details of epistemology, you need to understand how metaphysics conditions it. In order to understand the details of ethics, you need to understand how epistemology conditions it. And here's what I mean by conditioning it. Let's start with politics. In order to come up with rules of how man should govern himself, this depends on a certain ethics. Your politics follows from your ethics. What you consider to be good will determine what you consider to be good in the realm of man governing himself. Epistemology conditions ethics. What you consider to be good is dependent on what you think a valid method of obtaining knowledge is. So my classic example is, of course, Abraham sacrificing his own son because God told him to. God is the master of truth in the universe. So who am I to judge what's good and bad when the authority, the epistemological authority of the universe is telling me to kill him? And the way the universe is, the metaphysics, the facts about the basic constitution of the universe, this conditions facts about the best way of getting knowledge, the best epistemology. Now, Jordan Peterson is going to teach us something interesting about this hierarchy. And to tell you that, I'm going to answer the question, why is Jordan Peterson so influential despite his mumbo jumbo, his mysticism, his unscientific way of coming at the world? To understand this, I'm going to tell you a quick and very abridged story of the West. Once upon a time, man in the West relied on religion. He relied on Christianity. Basically, his epistemology was entirely that of faith. This was the Dark Ages. Then the Enlightenment happened, and science was unleashed. And Newton, Darwin, and other scientists showed that man's mind can know existence. And I think this permanently discredited religion. I think so long as we live in a world where the facts, or rather the fruits of scientific knowledge, are around us everywhere. Coffee, cheap coffee, a ceramic mug, a cheap one, a cell phone, something that even poor people can have that allow them to communicate with someone else on the other side of the world. Automobiles, all of these things. So long as we're surrounded by the constant reminder that man's mind can know the world and master it, I think religion has been discredited epistemologically. And so we can see how this works. We can see that a certain epistemology is going to condition the way we look at ethics. So even the ethics of Christianity, of course, or the ethics of religion generally, have been discredited. A lot of norms that religion takes very seriously are basically not taken seriously today. Yet Jordan Peterson is popular, even among some objectivists. Jordan Peterson putting forth a kind of advocacy of religion. So let's try to understand this by watching this here video.
You're going to be tested, that's for sure. And if you have a sustaining meaning, then well, Nietzsche said himself, he who has a why can bear any how. Why would you look in the darkest places? Because in the darkest places you can find what still shines. If it can shine in the darkest places, then you know it's a real light. And so you look at the things you don't want to look at. You have to look at the things you don't want to look at. Well, why do meaningful things? Well, first of all, what is meaning? But then why do meaningful things? And the answer is, well, because life is suffering and malevolence. It's ineradicable at its core. It's like, that will take you out. Make no mistake about it. You need you need to be armed with virtue in order for that not to turn into hell. Really, you really need that. And it isn't just your hell, that's bad enough. And that can be really bad, especially when you're contributing to it.
Okay, you need a meaning, you need a purpose to bear you through the catastrophe of life. That's something Jordan Peterson will say, that the utter catastrophe of life. I mean, first of all, speak for yourself. But second of all, he's making an important point, even though he's wrong on so many levels. You need a purpose, says Jordan Peterson, to carry you through life. So religion is discredited epistemologically, but then Jordan Peterson is here and he gives an argument for why you should adopt a religious ethics, why you should adopt a religious worldview. And that argument is, you need a purpose. You need meaning to guide you through life, to make life worth living. Now, the secular worldview we have today does not offer meaning or values. It offers a sterile universe of rocks bouncing off of each other where we don't have volition and we are a speck of dust in a vast cosmos. So as a result, Jordan Peterson does not even try to argue for faith. Instead, what he does is he just says, he bypasses this dependence entirely. He bypasses this epistemological trump card that science has over him. He simply goes straight for the main issue. Man needs ethics. I once tutored a kid who was struggling in physics, a college student. What became obvious very quickly to me is that the kid was not struggling primarily with physics. His ability to do math was not hampered. He knew the requisite material, but he could not, for the life of him, focus or be motivated to complete the class. And I asked him about this, and he said, well, I guess you're right. I guess it has nothing to do with my lack of ability. I just don't care about any of this, he said. I don't care about college. I was told by my parents to go here. All of this effort I'm putting in just seems meaningless. So I don't feel anything. And when I look at my parents are insisting that I go to college and I get a good job and I do all this stuff, and then I look at them and I just say, oh, what? So I can have a life like you? So I can be miserable, living a life based on choices which aren't really making me happy, living a life based on values I don't really care about? To hell with that. But at the same time, he has no meaning. So he has no meaning of his own. He hasn't created one of his own. So all there is to do is to try and sort of half-heartedly plow his way through his inner contradiction, to try and finish college and hope that something happens, And at one point, he thought about quitting college and joining the army. And I asked him, well, the United States, is this something you really value, something you really care about? Because I'm thinking, hey, if he really cares about military service, that might be much better than college. But he says no. He speaks at length. His parents are leftists, and he more or less agrees with his parents. He doesn't have much of an opinion, but he thinks his parents are right, that the United States is a force of evil on the world stage. But yet the kid says, I need some sort of purpose. Like, I want my life to mean something. So if I have a life of military service, maybe that will make me feel like my life matters. So here's what Sam Harris and all other secular philosophers don't understand. Peterson has brought whenever these secular philosophers are debating against Jordan Peterson has brought an assault rifle to a knife fight. He's brought ethics to a sterile conversation about what we know is true. While Sam Harris is trying to argue about, while Sam Harris just keeps insisting that, we can't know that because you're not using reason in order to get to this. What he doesn't realize is he's leaving us without any kind of compelling values. No one cares that Jordan Peterson's epistemology is mumbo jumbo and it doesn't make sense. He's giving us meaning. To someone like my student who's struggling, suffering with a life without meaning, this is a godsend. They'll do whatever Jordan Peterson says because he's giving them advice on a level that they're unable, for whatever reason, they're unable to guide themselves on. And I think there's a lot of reasons people have trouble guiding themselves on this. But I won't get into them. It's hard to live a life. It's pointless to live a life without purpose. So there's this temptation to pick something. So I asked this kid, when you join the army, if you're going to join the army, you don't understand why you joined. What happens when you kill someone? You might be sent into battle. You might have to kill someone. And now you're in a situation where you've killed someone. You've taken another human being's life. And you have no idea why. You have no idea if you haven't checked. You don't know if you're a force for good or a force for evil. And at this point, he kind of got derailed and our conversation didn't progress past that for some reason. But to continue it in my own mind, I think that someone in this position can go one of two ways. Once you kill someone, you can basically live with the contradiction. And I think probably in a lot of cases, this leads to suicide because you killed someone. You've done this possibly morally unspeakable act, and you don't know why. You don't know if it was you don't know if you were fighting for the sake of good. And the contradiction just consumes you. Or you can double down on the contradiction. You can just basically say, hey, look, I've chosen to value the United States of America, come hell or high water. Therefore, anything done in the service of the United States, or more specifically, done in the service of whatever its leaders ordered me to do, whatever I have to do that is the definition of moral. That's what I've chosen as my meaning. I've chosen it as my meaning. This is why Jordan Peterson is so dangerous. Jordan Peterson says, pick a meaning. You need one. Harry Binswanger actually refers to Jordan Peterson as a Nazi philosopher. And this is why. This is serious. If you just pick a meaning and you double down on it, like I just said, well, this is exactly how you get Nazis. This is exactly how you get people who Sam Harris would call good people, non-psychopathic people who aren't mentally, chemically deranged. This is how you get them to throw Jews into a gas chamber. is when they rely for someone else for their values. They rely on someone else's mind for the generation of their values. But of course, even in the case of a Nazi, of course, these things catch up with you. Evil can't last for long. Evil's destructive. The Nazis crashed and burned and suffered immensely because of the degree to which they were contradicting reality. They paid the price. They paid the price for not thinking for themselves. The entire country did, unfortunately. A lot of young people who weren't responsible also did. But this is but many of them defaulted mentally, epistemologically. They defaulted. They didn't use their own minds to pick their values, and they suffered the consequences. Now with Jordan Peterson's able to get away with this because it's universally believed that values are subjective, that it's just you have your feelings, I have my feelings, and science pretty much discredits all of them. Like science, the secular worldview is valueless. Remember, we're just rocks bumping into each other, basically, by the Sam Harris view of the world, which is what people think science tells us about values. So Peterson says, pick something. And what are we going to end up picking? We're going to end up picking the things that are sort of your deepest and most sacredly held feelings. Well, where do those come from? Well, Jordan Peterson says they come from this collective's unconscious, and he goes into this big Jungian mumbo jumbo. This is where the Virgin Mary and Marduk and this whole pantheon of, stories come in. He thinks it's somewhere embedded in our souls. There's all this mumbo jumbo, but at the end of the day, what's the real referent of all of this? The real referent is people's emotions. And for people who haven't chosen their own values, where do these emotions come from? They basically come from your parents, the way you were raised. So in some sense, Jordan Peterson isn't far off. It's just based on the accumulated garbage of centuries being passed down uncritically into your subconscious. But of course, values can be objective. You can choose values which promote your life in the long run. You can choose values which, like the Nazis, undermine your future happiness. You can choose values which destroy people around you and end up leading to destruction and death for yourself. Or you can choose a life where, say, like the life of Newton, he chose a life dedicated to the acquisition of knowledge. And each step led to more knowledge, bringing him further joy and further happiness. Each productive activity giving him a foundation for further enjoyment and further productive activity. Values can be objective. So let's return to, what lesson does this teach us about the hierarchy, the causal hierarchy of philosophy right here? Well, it shows us that, unlike this diagram we have in the lower right, we can see clearly that epistemology conditions ethics. But I think what Jordan Peterson has revealed is that some aspect of ethics conditions epistemology. Some aspect of ethics conditions epistemology. Why? Well, Jordan Peterson has demonstrated this for us. The only reason we need to acquire facts is because we're living beings who need to live and need to be happy. Now, Jordan Peterson doesn't acknowledge that we need to be happy. He thinks happiness is like a myth or something. But he does talk about the fact that you suffer. We only need to acquire facts because we can suffer and we can be happy, and we want to be happy or at least suffer less, as Jordan Peterson says. So in this way, we can see that epistemology is actually dependent, is sort of subservient to ethics in a certain way, because the only reason we need epistemology, the only reason we need a correct method of identifying facts is because we're living beings who have values. Now, Jordan Peterson points this out from a different perspective in the discussion with some objectivists at Objectivist conference. So here Jordan is explaining, they're talking about the fact that facts are objective, and Jordan is explaining the objectivist position that facts are objective.
Reality of facts, I don't see anything coming between me and this plastic bottle. Again, my simplistic view, right? Here's the plastic bottle. I can see it. It's a plastic bottle, and it's not something else. Now, there's a lot that goes into what is plastic, what is bottle, what is that. But that's what it is. I can describe it. I can actually, if I had the scientific knowledge, get down into the molecular structure, and it's real. It's actually here. It's not created by my consciousness or interpreted by my consciousness. It really is what it is. So I think what evolution has done is given us those tools.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Why is a stump and a beanbag both a chair? Well, because you're talking about
Why
the
is
self.
a stump and a beanbag both a chair? Because if you have a proper definition of a chair, then a stump and a beanbag both fit that definition.
What is the definition?
Well, I haven't thought about it, but something to sit in.
That's it.
Yeah. So.
It's something to sit on.
Yeah.
Right. That isn't inherent to the object.
Sure. No. Truth is.
But my
definitions are not inherent in the object. They're objectively created by my consciousness and that object.
Right,
but the object is an object, right? It's both of them are chairs, and both of them have a particular nature. That is, I can describe both. I can both say the stump and the beanbag are they're a chair, but I can also say they're different. The stump is made of wood, and it has this.
Well, the problem with the idea that the object presents itself is that two things are the same and different in a near infinite number of ways. And that's also a technical problem. So I can give you an example. So imagine that you're going to classify a set of 6 books. You're going to figure out how to arrange them in your shelf. You think, well, that's an easy thing to do. That's a conceptual problem, by the way. It's actually not an easy thing to do because there is an indefinite number of ways that you can classify a finite number of objects. So you could classify the books by color, by age, by thickness, by weight, by number of E's, by number of A's, by number of E's on the first page, by number of words, by number of phrases.
But this is where proof is
But
challenged,
this
right?
is a big problem.
Why,
because
the question is, why am I classifying them? So
that is
there's
the
no
question. Yes.
There's no intrinsic value to classifying.
The question is, why are we classifying them? When we're organizing books, when we're categorizing things, values influence the standard of classification. Again, we seem to be running across a certain reversal of the way we usually think about this. Ethics, an aspect of ethics, what we've chosen to value, conditions how we acquire knowledge somehow. This may not be the most clear formulation of this, but you'll see that I use it in my later work in a certain way. But I'm opening this up as an avenue of investigation for formulating the structure of philosophy itself. I'm pointing these things out. First, Jordan Peterson says the definition of a chair is dependent on its function. It's something you sit in. Then he talks about the way we classify things depends on our values. This is both true. So apparently what Jordan Peterson is saying is he's saying our values influence the way we integrate facts. Okay, and Rand agrees with this in a certain sense. Let me show you. This is from ITOE, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. The requirements of quote, the requirements of cognition forbid the arbitrary grouping of existence, both in regard to isolation and to integration. They forbid the random coining of special concepts to designate any and every group of existence with any possible combination of characteristics. For example, there is no concept to designate beautiful blondes with blue eyes, 5 feet 5 inches tall, and 24 years old. Such entities or groupings are identified descriptively If such a special concept existed, it would lead to senseless duplication of cognitive effort and to conceptual chaos. Everything of significance discovered about that group would apply to all other young women as well. There would be no cognitive justification for such a concept, unless some essential characteristic were discovered, distinguishing such blondes from all other women and requiring special study, in which case a special concept would become necessary. So here's what's going on here. This is an instance of man's needs, his purpose, the fact that he needs to understand the world in order to live in it. Aspects of ethics are conditioning the objectivist epistemology here. She doesn't say it that way, but it's implicit in what she's saying. We only need to understand the facts in order to navigate existence and to be happy instead of suffer. As a result, we need to identify existence in an efficient way and a way that is consistent with our purposes. So, for example, this absurd concept of blondes who are 5'5" and 24 years old with blue eyes, like that would be a senseless duplication. Unless, perhaps, you were a, Sports Illustrated swimsuit photographer, and there's something special about how these sorts of women appear on the camera. And so you may actually make a concept for that. Why? Because it integrates, because it makes sense given your purpose. The photographer may need a concept of this kind. Although the age is probably irrelevant. There'd probably be an age range for such a thing. Our values, Jordan Peterson is saying that our values influence the way we conceptualize. And this is true. Our values should condition the way we conceptualize. What does a scientist call it when you study something that can't possibly be of use for mankind's survival? That's called a waste of time. They call it a waste of time. So we can see, contra what Jordan Peterson is saying. Jordan Peterson's point is, we all know that values are subjective, so therefore truth is subjective as well, because the only way we apprehend truth is through our values. And that's true. We do, our values are part of the factors which condition our acquisition of truth, and they should be. But Jordan Peterson is trying to, wedge open the gap and pound his subjectivism in there. But values can be identified to be objective. You can find values which don't hinder your life, but actually help it, that give rise to future happiness instead of undermining your future happiness. And our scientific investigations should be in line with that which promotes our lives, not with that which is trivium. And what we find here is, and this is the upshot, this is how this ends up becoming relevant for this channel. As we go forward to prove and systematize math and physics, we will find that our value context is always conditioning the way we make conceptualization choices about math and science. So here's an example. In chemistry, we classify elements here. Here's hydrogen, it's element number 1. Here's helium, it's element number 2. Here's lithium, it's element number 3. We classify them by number. What's the number based on? The number is based on the number of protons in the nucleus of the atom. Okay, as you may remember, atoms are constructed of protons, neutrons, and electrons. You may remember this from school or the Discovery Channel. It's made of these things. And they all have different numbers of neutrons. They all have different numbers of protons, different numbers of electrons. Why did they choose the number of protons as the classification standard? What makes the number of protons essential? Why not the number of particles total? Hydrogen would have, would have 2, would be number 2. Lithium would be, I don't know. They all have different numbers of particles. So why not classify it that way? Well, here's why. the number of protons in an element, as we will find out in a while when our physics journey gets us here, the number of protons in an atom dictates the electron structure of that atom. And the electron structure of the atom dictates the way it interacts with other atoms. And the way an atom interacts with other atoms determines the chemistry of the atom. And this is and what I mean by that, it determines the way certain chemicals, certain atoms will interact with other atoms to make molecules and to form different compounds. So we can see the reason. So our classification scheme, this enormous classification scheme of all chemical elements, is determined by our purpose, or it's influenced by our purpose. We want to understand how the different elements interact with one another so we can make special materials, basically, so we can conduct chemical engineering. And so as a result, our classification scheme is based on an essential characteristic which gives rise to those chemical interactions. The way we conceptualize is conditioned by our reason for conceptualizing. And what we will find is, as we continue through physics, or as we start our journey through physics, we will always have to understand the values that we bring to the table in order to understand the way we conceptualize the facts of the case. And we find that we won't understand our scientific concepts unless we understand not only the scientific concepts which came before, but we also have to understand the values at stake, our reason, our purpose for being interested in these scientific values. Only then will we understand the way that we're conceptualizing those scientific facts. Conclusions. Number one, Jordan Peterson is influential because he's giving people something they desperately need: purpose. And he's delivered it in a way which is immune to the scientific epistemology. Sam Harris has no argument against him because Peterson knows this is absurd. He's not even trying to explain why this is scientific. He says, well, he's saying that there's this whole other realm. There's this whole other realm you're forgetting about, Sam Harris. There's not just the realm of facts, there's the realm of values. And since the only reason we're interested in apprehending the facts is because we need meaning and we need values. So this makes epistemology, Jordan Peterson is using the fact that epistemology is dependent on ethics in a certain way, on the causal hierarchy. He's using this in order to inoculate himself, his religious worldview, against the usual and valid epistemological arguments that the secular scientific worldview uses to usually destroy religion. Conclusion 2. And this is what I've just said. Jordan Peterson is demonstrating a wrinkle in philosophy's causal hierarchy. There's some sense in which epistemology is dependent on some aspect of ethics. Namely, we only need truth because we are living beings. Number 3, and this is the point that we will use while developing science, while proving science. Values are and should be part of the context of knowledge we reason with when proving new scientific truths, because the purpose of science is the furthering of man's life. Okay. So yes, Jordan Peterson is silly. Yes, his arguments make no sense. Yes, he's unscientific. But man cannot live on facts alone. He needs values which are derived from the facts. And so long as we're busy refuting someone like Jordan Peterson based on epistemology alone, and we don't explain a rational ethical view, a rational set of values, we're not even fighting him on his level. We're bringing a knife to an assault rifle fight. At the time of me making this video, Jordan Peterson is suffering from a number of health or maybe psychological problems. I haven't looked too deeply into it, but this is an issue that is independent of the man himself. This is an issue that is independent of Jordan Peterson himself. So this is something that should be studied just in order to enhance our knowledge of philosophy and then in order to strengthen the objectivist case for our epistemology, our ethics, our politics. So with that, I will thank you for listening to my presentation. And I'd really like it if you'd like, comment, or subscribe. It turns out that if you do these things, it really boosts me in the algorithms. This is what I've heard. But the real reason, I mean, I would really appreciate that. But but if you're gonna comment, do so with the idea that you want to continue some sort of discussion here. Ask me questions, point out places where I may be wrong, stuff like that. It would be great. And then liking and subscribing will allow you to get more of my content as it comes out weekly. And so please also support me on Patreon. You can support this project once you get a sense of what it is this project will be about, systematizing science using these new principles of epistemology. Once you get a sense of what this project is about, I think you'll find it very valuable. I think you'll want to see it continue. And a good way to do that is to pay me for my efforts. So you can visit Patreon in the link below to do that. And again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.